So we've talked about the actual definition of homelessness, a little bit about eligibility and priority needs. The final two parts of the five-part test are a little bit more simple, and in one sense, because they don't kind of figure in that initial duty under Section 184 and Section 188, you've got time then to actually work out what the law says, as you're dealing with it, because it's going to be spread out over several days, if not weeks. So you've got time to kind of get on Google and actually find out what the law is. But in terms of what it actually is, so under Part 7, essentially what local connection means is if you meet one of four criteria. So first one is living in settled accommodation for either 6 out of the last 12 months or 3 out of the last 5 years. Having close family living in the area for at least 5 years, have a permanent employment contract in the area, and finally be kind of getting medical treatment which you're not able to get elsewhere. Now, I've never actually seen that. So if you think about it and you break those kind of criteria down, you'll see that it's actually possible to have local connection to lots of different areas all at once. So, you could have lived in, I'm from Bedford. I might have lived in Bedford for 6 out of the last 12 months, but I lived in Milton Keynes for the previous 3 years. So I'd kind of qualify into both areas. I might have close family kind of dotted around, sort of across Bedford, Central Beds, Milton Keynes and so on. I might have a job, in Northampton. So, there's lots of different areas I might have local connection to. And equally, it's possible to have no local connection anywhere. So, for example, people particularly who've been like rough sleeping for a long time, they haven't had settled accommodation. They don't necessarily know kind of where their family are even at. If they haven't got that family support, if they're not working, then actually they wouldn't have a local connection anywhere. And in one sense, pragmatically speaking, that means that they can approach any council and that council has nowhere to refer that person back to. But those initial duties under Section 184 and Section 188, which we covered in a few videos ago, they apply no matter where your local connection is. So in order to kind of illustrate how local connection referrals work, I'll kind of give you some examples. So as I say, I'm from Bedford. Next local authority over is Milton Keynes. If my house was flooded, which means I'm automatically in priority need. I'm homeless, I'm automatically in priority need. If I approach Milton Keynes Council and said, I'm homeless, can you help me out? They are under the duties under Section 184 to start inquiries, and they would be under Section 188 duties to provide me with temporary accommodation, even though I don't have a local connection there. So I don't have any family there, I've never lived there before. So assuming there's reason to believe I might be eligible, so if I'm a British national who passes the habitual residency test, they would have a duty to provide me with temporary accommodation immediately. What they would then do is they would ascertain that I have a local connection to Bedford, but not Milton Keynes, and therefore they would make contact with Bedford Borough Council and they would look to refer me back to Bedford Borough Council. And Bedford Borough Council would have to accept that the referral, and so I would move from temporary accommodation provided by Milton Keynes to temporary accommodation provided by Bedford Borough Council, and that's kind of how it should work. So that's kind of the nice, easy one. Say, for example, now I've been rough sleeping for a long time. I'm originally from Bedford. I was born in Bedford, but I haven't had settled accommodation here. I don't have any family here. And I approach Milton Keynes Council. Again, ask them for help, give them reason to believe I might be homeless as Section 184 happens. And maybe I've got some significant mental health issues, so I also kind of trigger the kind of duty under Section 188 to provide me with temporary accommodation because I might be vulnerable, might be in priority need. Milton Keynes Council again would have to put me in temporary accommodation immediately, and then they look into where I have a local connection to, and they realise, okay, he doesn't have a local connection to Milton Keynes, but actually he doesn't have a local connection anywhere else either, so there's nowhere to refer him back to. So they would essentially have to keep me in temporary accommodation there, and assuming I'm not intentionally homeless, then they would owe me a full duty to house me by Milton Keynes. So that's kind of the second one, where how it would work if you had no local connection anywhere. The third kind of situation would be where I'm subject to domestic abuse. So say, luckily I'm not, but if I was subject to domestic abuse in Bedford and I was at risk in Bedford, I could approach Milton Keynes Council, say, I'm homeless, help me out, trigger Section 184. I say I'm homeless because of domestic abuse, therefore there's reason to believe I might be in priority need. So they'll kind of look at that. And again, they would look at local connections to say, okay, well, he doesn't have a local connection to Milton Keynes. He does have a local connection to Bedford because he's been living there in settled accommodation. However, because I'm at risk of domestic abuse in Bedford, Milton Keynes shouldn't refer me back to Bedford. And essentially, Bedford Borough Council would just refuse the referral and say, no, he's at risk here. So that's kind of the third way this works. It gets a bit more complicated, and it probably is worth kind of covering it, because in the domestic abuse example, I could approach Milton Keynes. So say I was subject to domestic abuse, I could approach Milton Keynes, but I could also actually approach Bedford Borough Council, and potentially Bedford Borough Council, they would be under a duty to house me as well. They would potentially need to source temporary accommodation out of the area. They'd have to find it, and they'd have to effectively pay for it in the first instance elsewhere. So in one sense, where you apply for temporary accommodation, or where you make a homeless application to, particularly when you are at risk of domestic abuse, it's really important that you choose the right one, because effectively what you want to do is you want to approach the local authority where you want to live. That's kind of the thing. So, assuming I don't have local connection elsewhere where it is safe for me to, for me to be. If I wanted to go, I'm fleeing domestic abuse from Bedford, I don't have a local connection to any other areas, and actually, I feel I need to be X number of miles away from the perpetrator to be safe. Again, happily I'm not, but hypothetically speaking, I say, do you know what? I fancy living in Bournemouth. I should approach Bournemouth Borough Council or Bournemouth City Council, where it is. And again, they'd have to accept the application. They'd have to place me in temporary accommodation, and they can't refer me back to Bedford. The final thing I'd say about this, sorry, I will kind of talk a little bit more about domestic abuse here actually, because it is useful to know, is that just because I'm at risk of domestic abuse in Bedford doesn't necessarily mean I have to be housed elsewhere. So what councils quite often do, and I did a full video on this, so I'll probably try and get the link for that here. But essentially, there's this kind of tension between where it's safe for me to live and where my support network is, because it's no good saying to me, okay, you're at risk in Bedford, the only safe place for you is going to be up in Durham or something, miles up north, where I know no one, I've got no support network. I might reasonably say, actually, my job's here, my kids go to school here, all my family's in Bedford. Even though I might be at risk of domestic abuse in Bedford, there is that kind of act of balancing that risk out. And the code of guidance isn't 100% clear about what should take precedence, but certainly that kind of blanket thing of you're at risk of Bedford, therefore you must be housed elsewhere. That's simply a blanket policy. Councils would need to look at the individual circumstances. They need to balance up genuine risk assessments of the risk. And sometimes councils could say, look, you know what, this perpetrator is very high risk. We cannot house you in the Bedford area. We need to house you a certain distance away to kind of keep you safe. I mean, let's face it, if a perpetrator wants to continue the abuse, perpetrators aren't exactly unknown to go and pursue people around the country. But that's kind of how councils should work. They should be listening. They should be, very sympathetic. They should kind of look at that person's wider kind of social considerations and stuff to make that decision. But that in a nutshell is how local connection should work. So that kind of leaves intentional homelessness, which I'll do in the next video. Again, like the video, subscribe to us. There is a whole series of videos that kind of spring out of this kind of basic introduction series. So, and in one sense, the information we're sharing here is the information we use to get people housed every day. So that's kind of, really kind of can't recommend enough just kind of getting hold of these kind of basic kind of concepts. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video.